Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our exploration, and our discussions, you and I, with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2021. And that brings us to that title, which has been designated by the Criterion Collection at spy number 1085. This is a work from 1938, and the director is Howard Hawks. And the name of the work is Bringing Up Baby. This is the work from 1938, and it is from the great director, Howard Hawks, and it is based upon a story by Hager Wilde. The screenplay is credited to Hager Wilde and Dudley Nichols, with the cinematography by Russell Meddy, and it stars, among others, in its really splendid cast, people like Charles Ruggles and Walter Catlett, and Barry Fitzgerald, and of course, Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant as Susan Vance and David Huxley, respectively. This is the classic, zany, timeless romantic comedy, which is, of course, Bringing Up Baby. I think if we were to try to focus in on the story essence of this film, Bringing Up Baby, there's a lot going on here within this running time, and that's one of the great strengths of this film, of course. That's so much information, so many plots and subplots and subplots, etc., are packed, and the pace is so fast and relentlessly so, in a beautiful, glorious way. So there's so much here, and there's so much interaction and engagement within its frame. Perhaps, however, maybe if we were to try to say in essence what it could be said to be about, one could try to focus, for instance, on the two characters of David, played by Cary Grant on the one hand, and then Susan, played by Katharine Hepburn, on the other. So we have the Cary Grant character who has a number of traits that we see or that we identify at the outset of the film. We understand that he is working in this museum, in particular with dinosaurs or dinosaur bones, in one particular brontosaurus, yes, with the bone, a very important bone from his perspective, which is referred to in the film as the intercostal clavicle. And this forms one of the plot points, or MacGuffins, as it were, that drives his character along through one plot strand. Another aspect of his character that we know is the fact that he is about to be married. And so this lends itself so perfectly to the romantic and comedic tension, all the fireworks that will follow with his interactions with the other main character of the film, who is Susan, played by Katharine Hepburn. Now, what Susan brings to the proceedings is really splendid and glorious. Those being, for instance, a kind of vivacious, energetic spirit that could also be described as charmingly chaotic, almost improvisational type of way in which she is expressing through the comedic timing and her visual expressiveness as captured on screen, the way that Katharine Hepburn is capturing the character's sense of almost joie de vivre, the joy of living. And that joy of living is expressed, as I say, through this almost improv, chaotic, and charming, heartwarming way And it is these two forces, really, the Cary Grant character and the Katharine Hepburn character, these two forces that, in essence, collide, and their interactions create, or what result from these interactions are these hijinks, fireworks extraordinaire that are romantic and comedic and oh so entertaining and oh so clever and oh so inventive and imaginative. And so it is this collection of fireworks that is brought together and presented for our amusement and entertainment in the form of this film from Howard Hawks and Company, Bringing Up Baby. So I think that is perhaps one way of describing what Bringing Up Baby is. It's been described as like a zany screwball romantic comedy, and it is. And there is so much that is layered into the film in terms of the information that is packed in, the amount of characters that go in and out, and and as I say, the way that the chemistry between and among the various players forms this overall sense of spirit and whirlwind pace and very funny brands of humor and different brands of humor, as well as the lovely interaction between the two main stars, creating the sense of romantic chemistry that also glides the film or guides the film through from the very start to the very end. It is a wonderful, iconic, timeless work in that way. And speaking of fireworks in this film, there are a number of fireworks here. And when I say the word fireworks, I'm alluding to, for instance, certain examples of plot information and comedy and romantic tension that are contained quite spectacularly within the confines of this film. And when one thinks about it, one realizes just the vastness of the types of firework energy information that is contained here. So it's a real feat of filmmaking prowess that all these various fireworks energetic pieces of information are able to be balanced in this clever and perfect way that Howard Hawks and Company are able to deliver. So what do I mean by this? So for example, we have so much packed into the plot from, say, the museum and the interplay between the characters in the museum and all the little details in the foreground and background, to golf games, to mistaken identity, mistaken cars, or mistaken golf balls, and then that leading to interactions between Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant. And then suddenly we have this idea about needing some kind of financial grant security, and that leads Cary Grant to want to make advances or approaches to certain elements of high-class society on the one hand, and so this class-related hijinks ensues, and that also brings into the fore the way in which Susan, the Katharine Hepburn character, is connected to that. But that also leads to other situations or situational comedy scenes involving the city and the country, the nightlife and the country life, fashion mishaps, and certain examples of dialogue that are very clever, like two-way dialogue or three-way dialogue. There's a particular scene, very funny, very famous, involving a three-way conversation over a telephone, two different telephones at once, plus the third person that is off screen, and the types of little jokes that are played, say, by the Katharine Hepburn character on the Cary Grant character, the use of time, for instance. And in that interplay, too, or in other examples, we have the dialogue, which is sharp and crisp, and it operates, I think, on many levels of comedy. For example, one of those levels of comedy could be said to be the way in which repetition is guided upon, or the way in which lines being repeated using different inflections of voice can create or can generate a sense of the funny or the absurd or the comic or the real lovely and charming. And this is true in particular, for instance, at the way that Katharine Hepburn repeats lines, and she tends to do it almost under her breath, as it were, almost as an aside, but it just, and every time it has a different inflection. But that adds to the romantic energy. It also adds to the comedic timing and energy of her performance. So that's one element. Another element, too, of course, is the double entendre. There are quite a number of double entendre moments in this film. They're presented in this oh so subtle way, but still they are there, and if they are caught, or if one recognizes them, then it really adds yet another element or dimension to these particular scenes. So that is generated in the comedy, that is generated in terms of the way the dialogue is layered in. So that's another firework element. Speaking of that, these situational comedy aspects are also fueled by the use of the props and the use of the fashion setups. Fashion is a very big part of this film, and we see the get-ups and the gags, and almost it relies maybe on a sense of a mistaken identity, a little bit on the one hand, but more it's a sense of catching Cary Grant in certain absurd or otherwise non-David Huxley-like antics or behavior, and that is part of the source of the humor. Cary Grant's character is the serious one, whereas Katharine Hepburn's character is the outrageous or unpredictable one, and it's a combination of these two, this comic duo, as it were, creates the source of the hijinks, or one of the sources of the comedic hijinks. And so this is also shown through in, say, the certain fashion situations that we see throughout, and that's due to, say, Cary Grant, but it's also due to Katharine Hepburn. I mean, there's a very famous scene involving the Ritz nightclub scene and a certain fashion mishap that occurs, and so this is also a very another example of that. And then, speaking of fashion and the wardrobe, there's also the use of the props and other character elements as well. So props, we have, of course, the golf ball, the cars, the wardrobe fashion. There's also the bone and what happens there. And speaking of the bone, this brings in other characters. When I say other characters, I mean both human and animal, because we have very famous characters, the character of George and the character of Baby. So who is George and who is Baby, of course? Well, George is the dog and Baby is the leopard. And so we have in this not only the hijinks on golf courses, nightclubs, in the country, and mistaken identity, interactions with the authorities, romance, wedding. A wedding is going to happen tomorrow, but maybe there's a love that is emerging between these two characters here, the loss of a bone, a brontosaurus bone, etc., etc., etc. Not only do we have this, we also have a dog and we have a leopard. And so you think, wow, where else could this film go? But it goes there, and it uses these elements, as I say, in these firework extravagant ways, and yet still it manages to balance these elements and these seemingly disparate elements in this not just coolly delivered cocktail. This cocktail is one that is so, it is filled with so much flavor, and the flavor just ignites in these charming, lovable ways every time one engages with it. And so this feat, this way in which the filmmakers are able to balance all these seemingly extravagant tones together in this film and pace it so well, this is one of the strokes of genius of this film. And that's due, I think, to the direction and pacing and editing, etc., and also the way the camera glides and moves within the scene itself. And it is also due with the way that everything is impeccably timed. The timing is remarkable. Now, I'm speaking, for instance, of the timing of the scenes, the timing of the way the characters interact, go from one place to another. Now, there's a very famous scene involving the leopard and the dog, George and Baby, and they're sometimes engaged in the same shot, and we understand later in, say, some of the Criterion supplements how some of those shots were actually real and others might have been optical optical illusions, but still that framing or that timing really is so critical and key to the success of this film. So the timing is from the pacing and editing and the mise en scène. It is also from the comedic timing, prowess and perfection of the performers. Now, this timing shows through in, say, the dialogue delivery. As I was alluding to earlier, some of the dialogue deliveries, say, for example, of Katharine Hepburn's character and the way she just is able to, say, repeat certain lines as if it was inspired on the moment. It's brilliant, brilliant, and it just is a perfect example of the timing genius of, say, her performance and her character on the one hand. Same is true for Cary Grant. There are some ways in which he has to combine the panicked energy of his David character as he's speaking these lines in a sense of frustration and panic. But that's part of the charm of his position and his dilemma. But he delivers those lines with a perfect sense of timing and aplomb. And then on the other hand, he also has to show a sense of frustration in his physical performance. And so the broad physical comedy, the slips and the falls and the frustration going through doors, running, fast walking through hallways, etc. That type of physical comedy too is performed perfectly, absolutely perfectly, and nothing is lost, nothing is, say, overextended. Everything feels perfect. And so this timing and this pacing, I think, goes a long way in further establishing or further supporting the way in which this film contains, as I say, so many different and disparate elements of fireworks, energy, and information. It's able to do so and contain it and balance it and provide it to us in this form of wonderful romantic comedy entertainment, in this splendid cocktail that is oh so delicious every single time one has a take of it. So this is, I think, the real source of the genius or charm or the reasons for the timelessness of this film, Bringing Up Baby. And of course it means that with so much energy packed into it and so much information packed into it and just so many pieces of plot thread or subplot thread that are interwoven into it, into creating this multi-thread masterpiece of manners and comedy. What this means, of course, is that one can watch it and every single time something new emerges, or one can look at it from a different perspective. For instance, in my own take, I watch it more recently, and I realized that there are actually quite a number of double entendres in this film that I didn't recognize when I had seen the film on earlier occasions. And so that is an example for me as to how much this film is a type of timeless classic, because it means that it not only can withstand multiple viewings, but in fact it becomes enhanced due to the multiple viewing experience with this film. So that is an example, or that is one of the reasons why this film is so timeless and so entertaining and so clever the way it is. This is, of course, the film Bringing Up Baby. The Criterion Collection has released the film Bringing Up Baby. That's spine number 1085, and this is the Blu-ray edition, and it is purported to be based on the new 4K digital restoration of the work with monaural sound, uncompressed monaural, and at 1.37 to 1 aspect ratio. And I must say that it looks and feels and sounds sparkling and wonderful and fresh. So this is a great addition to the Criterion Collection in this new Blu-ray form. Now, that is not all. We get a number of other things, as is often the case for Criterion Collection releases, as we know. So what do we get? So we get, as I say, a number of things. First of all, along with the film itself, we have the option, the audio option of listening to the commentary track. This is an already existing commentary track from 2005, and this is by Peter Bogdanovich. Peter Bogdanovich is sitting with us, watching the film as we are watching the film, and we hear a number of great things. One of the great strengths of Peter Bogdanovich's commentaries, he's done a number of commentaries, and he's done a number of interviews about his films, but also his love of Hollywood films and the Golden Age and certain Hollywood filmmakers. And Howard Hawks in particular, and Bringing Up Baby in particular. And what's so great about Peter Bogdanovich's style and presentation is he contains within his comments a great sense of information and appreciation and love. You can tell that he really loves this film, Bringing Up Baby, and it shows. It shows he is. There are some moments where he is just. You know that he is, as he's watching, he's caught up in that particular scene or particular moment, and then as he is doing this, he is giving us little bits of information about the background and certain production details. He gives, for instance, he gives details about, say, Katharine Hepburn's performance and what it took in order to get that particular comedic performance, and according to him, and indeed from other sources in the Criterion Collection supplements, for instance, we understand that there was a certain way in which the performers needed to find that particular zone of comedic timing first, and then once that zone was discovered, then they were off to the races, as it were. And so these details, I think, emerge in this really lovingly given commentary from Peter Bogdanovich. And again, it is an earlier, already existing commentary from a previous non-Criterion release, but still, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, on the contrary, the more commentary tracks, the better, in my opinion. And so it's great that we have this commentary track for the reasons that I cited, and just to get from his perspective what's another way to look at this is, I always have to remind myself when I'm watching Bringing Up Baby just how remarkable it is, not just as a comedic film and a romantic, zany screwball comedy film, but also as a technical feat. There are so many tricks, so many visual effects, etc., having to do, for example, with the leopard and how to shoot the shots of the leopard and how to shoot a scene with a leopard there. Do you have it with the actors or do you have it separately, etc.? And so these and other details emerge in the Peter Bogdanovich commentary. And so his enthusiasm is a great reminder of just how wonderful and how inventive this film is. And so please, if you have the opportunity, and if you haven't done so yet, please check out the film with the Peter Bogdanovich commentary. It is so worth it, and it's a wonderful time, and it's a great source of information. Again, this is the commentary track that's included. That is not all, of course, because then we have a number of supplements that can be found or accessed via the supplements menu on the title screen, or the Blu-ray screen, or the menu screen. And so the first of these supplements is a type of maybe visual essay. This is from Scott Eyman, and he is the author of Cary Grant, A Brilliant Disguise, and he is, say, an expert in, or a cinema historian, and he has a particular expertise into the life and career of Cary Grant. Now, this particular visual essay or interview is approximately 18 minutes. It's described as being from 2021. This is great. This is so great because Cary Grant is one of the key components of this film, Bringing Up Baby. It is his character that forms the opposite in terms of the dramatic and comedic spectrum, that the other side being, of course, the Katharine Hepburn character. But Cary Grant, therefore, is a very key component here. And there is so much to there's so much fascinating aspects to Cary Grant's life and career, where he came from, Archie Leach, etc., and then what his start was like in terms of his early films, Paramount films, and then what that led to in terms of his career at the time versus the certain films that he made, say, outside of that studio in other places like RKO, etc., that started to build his reputation as the one, the only, the iconic Cary Grant, and Sylvia Scarlett, etc. And this leads to his work with certain directors as well, Leo McCarey and Howard Hawks, especially. And of course, Howard Hawks is mentioned here because, of course, the connection with Bringing Up Baby and other films. And so this is also a conversation that is showing us the evolution, if you will, of Cary Grant's persona as someone who has impeccable comic timing and taste, and someone who has this screen presence that is very much reliant on almost a peculiar, unique branding of the Cary Grant image and persona and style that is, I think, rooted in a number of different genres. In particular, of course, we bring it up, in the context of Bringing Up Baby, and so one of those roots of branding of the Cary Grant persona or image or style is, of course, the comedic timing. And so, for these and other reasons, I think this visual essay, the Scott Eyman essay, or his interview on Cary Grant, is superb. So please check it out if you can. Again, it's approximately 18 minutes. That's not all, because next we have a one-on-one interview, or a conversation, if you will, with John Bailey. And John Bailey is talking about the cinematography aspects of the film Bringing Up Baby, and appreciation of the work of Russell Meddy. And this is called Russell Meddy and the Language of Comedy. It's approximately 11 minutes. And again, Russell Meddy is the cinematographer of the film, and so John Bailey is now talking and sharing with us his comments in appreciation of the legacy of Russell Meddy as shown through Bringing Up Baby, and of course other aspects of Russell Meddy's career, because John Bailey does mention and does remind us about how Russell Meddy has worked with a number of other very famous directors, Douglas Sirk and Orson Welles as examples, and of course Howard Hawks too, and Howard Hawks in Bringing Up Baby. This is a great conversation, so great. The way in which John Bailey focuses in on, for instance, specific examples in the film Bringing Up Baby, and tells us from the cinematography, use of camera operation perspective, and shares with us his comments as to how great these scenes are. This is so illuminating and so informative and so wonderful, and yet another example of a loving tribute, contemporarily given loving tribute of the work of these masters, these experts, these great filmmaking artists, Russell Meddy being one of them, that came together to create Bringing Up Baby. In this conversation, for instance, John Bailey mentions the Ritz nightclub scene, and he's talking about what he refers to as dolly shots, the movement of the camera, and how in interesting ways the camera movements seem to supplant or to replace the need to edit within the scene. And so in other words, according to John Bailey's observations, instead of the camera needing to go from one place within the scene to another place within the same scene via a cut or an edit, the camera will do that work, and the camera will glide from one end to another, from one bit of information to another bit of information. Because as we know, within this nightclub scene, there is actually a lot going on, and there are a lot of different mini scenarios going on. And so sometimes that can be a cut that joins them, but other times it can be a camera movement that joins them as well. And he also, John Bailey remarks about how within this, and within the film proper, there are, relatively speaking, very few close-ups. And so when the close-ups do occur, They are very striking and very memorable. It doesn't occur in this Ritz nightclub scene, but there's another instance later on in the film where there's an interaction between Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, and suddenly there is a close-up on Katharine Hepburn. Relatively speaking, it's not really a very huge, deep close-up, but it's still, relatively speaking, a type of close-up. And so this, I think, adds a sort of emphasis and effect. And which I think is which is, I think, the great point that John Bailey brings up here. So he also mentions this in the context of the jail sequence of the film as well, and the way that things are framed, the characters are engaged and contained within the space. And that allows also for a certain sense of freedom in a very interesting paradoxical way. So for these and other reasons, and using these examples, John Bailey's comments on the work of Russell Meddy in the context of Bringing Up Baby, and also reminding us or teaching us about the career of Russell Meddy, is really wonderful. And he closes with, speaking of the career, because of course Russell Meddy is also associated in another way with another very famous filmmaker, that being Stanley Kubrick, and the film Spartacus. And so John Bailey ends with a little bit of an anecdote, or perhaps an anecdotal conjecture regarding Russell Meddy and Stanley Kubrick, which is a very interesting comment to end upon. And it's an example of how informative and entertaining and enlightening this particular conversation is, again, with John Bailey on the work of Russell Meddy in the context of Bringing Up Baby. Please check it out if you can. Next, we have a one-on-one discussion or interview or an appreciation by Craig Barron, film historian and expert Craig Barron. And this is in regards to the work of Linwood Dunn. This is a discussion that's approximately 12 minutes from 2021. The visual effects work of Linwood Dunn. And it is called But What About My Leopard? The Magic of Optical Effects Pioneer Linwood Dunn. And this is talking a little bit about the history and background of Linwood Dunn, his work, for instance, in RKO, what was known also at the time as being, in particular, a type of tech or technology-driven studio. Linwood Dunn's work in his pioneering work with aspects of film technology or cinema technology, in particular, his work with the optical printer, and the Acme Dunn optical printer work, and also his work outside when he established his own independence, and his work in film effects of Hollywood on other film productions and TV productions such as Star Trek as an example. So Linwood Dunn is a very important component of this period of cinema and cinema technology, composites, and the use of special effects within the frame, and also composed in post-production aspects as well. And this idea of sort of taking two separate images, or two or more separate images, I should say, and putting them together into one motion or one shot is very important as an example of his work in films like Bringing Up Baby. And so this leads into a discussion of his work here in Bringing Up Baby, specifically, or as an example, the way in which the leopard, the character of Baby, the leopard is almost really seamlessly integrated into many of these shots. Now, we have to remember, of course, that oftentimes there could be a sense of maybe danger or risk to the performers or crew involved if there is an actual animal on set. And so oftentimes, once in a while, you'll see a shot with the animal that's actually together with the actor, but then other times there will need to be some kind of means by which a separation will take place. But that separation has to be invisible in order to maintain or sustain the illusion of the film, as we know. So this is the art, and this is the necessity of special effects or visual effects. And so this example is used as the context by which this conversation is taking place. And we see just how, for instance, the animals that are involved are integrated into these scenes in terms of optical effects as well. practical and optical effects, and it is fascinating. There's some scenes involving what was known or what is described as the split screen process. Sometimes there can be within the same frame. On one side there is the animal, and on the other side there is the performer, and they didn't shoot the scene at the same time, but one shot was made on one occasion, then the other shot was made on the other occasion, and they were blended together. And we are given some examples of how this was done. It is very clever, and surprisingly too, there is, and also it's an extraordinary aspect too, which is sometimes this also involves movement. The fact that there's also movement as an element that's added is extraordinary. And in addition to this, there's also some details about the special effects and the special effects background and decor. There's some really cool details, for instance, about the museum set, and maybe you can see in the background, or sometimes in the foreground too, some props that are actually also from King Kong. This is really overall, these are examples of how great this discussion is about Linwood Dunn and his work, and about the special effects of this film, Bringing Up Baby. And again, this is a reminder of just what a technical feat this film is at the time. And so it's a romantic comedy, it's a wonderful, iconic film, and it's also a marvel of technical innovation, an expression of the evolution of cinema technology as well. So a wonderful conversation. Please check it out if you can. Also, he speaks to, I should mention, that the credits credit Vernon Walker in terms of the special effects, but Craig Barron talks about why that was the case, and in fact acknowledges also the work of Linwood Dunn. So please, for that and for other reasons, please check out this conversation. It's well worth it. That's not all, because then we get a film, a sort of documentary film, not documentary, more like an interview, a almost 1 hour, it's 56 minutes, so it's just shy of an hour. It is from Hans Christoph Blumenberg, and this is from 1977. And we understand too that this was the last filmed interview with Howard Hawks before his passing. But this work is called Howard Hawks: A Hell of a Good Life. And this is an interview from 77, and then this work was then, I think, premiered in 1978. And here we have sit-down interviews edited together in various places in his home, in certain rooms, outdoors, driving, talking about aspects of his life, his career, and the things that he loves, and his family, and anecdotes about people that he worked with, Douglas Fairbanks or Mary Pickford or Cary Grant or etc., and just anecdotes on set, off set, his views on cinema, his perspectives on cinema, and his philosophy on cinema, the reason why he decides to position the camera the way he does, his experience with effects films or dazzling shots within films, and how he feels about that, his own direct engagement with that in some of his filmography work, but then ultimately how he views his approach to cinema, and what he regards as far as the perspective of the viewer, or the perspective and how the camera from his vantage point should somehow reflect that. And so this is, I think, overall a really great celebration and legacy of Howard Hawks from his own words. It is giving us, from the director's words, from the artist's own perspective, his take on his own style, and also his love of the genre, and anecdotes about all the legends that he has met. He too is a legend, so legends meeting legends, and the anecdotes that came from that. And also there are some very quiet, intimate moments too. There's some aspects in the film dealing with Howard Hawks' interests, racing, cars, and also how that involves his own son as well. So this is a very valuable interview, and we see the words of Howard Hawks. He expresses himself so well, so clearly, and with such clarity and precision, as well as a sense of calm manner, demeanor. So we get a sense of who he is and his life and times and career. So this is great. It's Howard Hawks' A Hell of a Good Life from the late 70s. So please check this out if you can. And so it's primarily Howard Hawks' own words in his interview. Occasionally there will be, or once in a while, there will be a little bit of narration, which is in the German language, but that is also provided with English language subtitles for those who, like me, who don't speak German. But primarily it is the one-on-one interview comments from Howard Hawks himself. And it's great. It's really great. Please check it out if you can. I mentioned, let me just mention too before I move on, he mentioned things about his own perspective on his own works. He says, for instance, I'm a storyteller, I'm not an artist, which is a very profound statement from Howard Hawks himself, and it leads into his philosophy as to how he regards his own filmmaking and his own films. And he just says, you just look at a thing, and he talks about the perspective of the camera and the filmmaking. And he talks of, and I mentioned all these anecdotes, legends meeting legends, and there are anecdotes about Lauren Bacall, Ernest Hemingway, Carol Lombard, etc. And he speaks about racing, he speaks about flying, and all this. So it's great. Please check it out if you can. And then that's not all, because the Criterion collection continues with its supplements with what's described as a selected scene commentary with Shelley Foote. And this is totaling approximately 22 minutes, and it is from 2021. And here we have Shelley Foote's comments focusing primarily on the fashion and costumes here. Howard Greer. And Howard Greer's work with the costumes in general, and also specifically in Bringing Up Baby. And so this is really great, and it's brought up in the context of a number of scenes. So we see the opening titles, and then we see the nightclub scene, and then the telephone scene between Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn and the leopard, and then there's a scene which can be referred to as, say, with the scene with Cary Grant wearing a negligee, and then there's another scene where Cary Grant is wearing sort of hunting fashion costuming. And so in these contexts, in these scenes, we have the selected scene commentary, again focusing primarily on the costume design and the history of the work of Howard Greer and the design philosophy of Howard Greer and the couture business and how it relates to the film industry and use of costumes in comedies, and then other aspects of his career. And so, for instance, in the nightclub scene, we have comments that deal with the way in which this is an example of the high neckline in a lot of the costumes that we see Katharine Hepburn wear, and the way in which this is maybe evocative of a type of Katharine Hepburn style, fashion style. And this also, this high neckline collar aspect also in this and other scenes provides perhaps another comedic prop, as it were, because it adds yet another element of the romantic flair and the comedic flair. And so we have a lot of things, and I mentioned earlier, this is a film with a lot of information packed into it. One of the sources of that information is the fashion and the costumes. So this is really great. In the telephone scene, there is maybe the subtle connection. As an example, the detail of the patterning on Katharine Hepburn's fashion, what she's wearing as she's talking on the phone, and the leopard and all the miscommunication of what's going on, the perceived danger of what's going on. But the leopard is part of the scene, and so we have the pattern, the spotted pattern on her dress at the time, which might be a subtle type of clue or connection with the leopard itself or baby. And so this is really clever as well. And then we have the other scenes involving Cary Grant wearing the nightgown negligee, and then wearing the hunter's costuming or uniform. And so this is, of course, augmenting or further showing us the Cary Grant comedic humor based on the serious uptight nature of his character. And these are examples of his serious uptight character being placed in, from his perspective, quite unusual circumstances as expressed via the fashion. So great stuff. Again, this is another reminder of the way that this film has yet another source of information and humor and comedy and also cleverness and association. This is fantastic. I wish it could have gone on for the entirety of the film to have another full-length commentary, but scene select commentary, is still, of course, very welcome, and this is great. So please check it out. Once again, it's from Shelley Foote from 2021, totaling approximately 22 minutes. But that's not all, because then we have a recording which is described as being from October 1969 and totaling approximately 35 minutes. This is an audio recording, and this is described as being after a screening of the film that was presented by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. And this audio recording is Cary Grant essentially addressing the audience and answering questions from the audience. And so we get the words of Cary Grant some years after the fact, but still the audience was very much, obviously it was very much into the film, and they were talking later and reflected in the questions that were asked by audience members to Cary Grant. And Cary Grant was so generous and so warm and so self-effacing and modest too, and very, very clever and very polite. And also he addressed each of the questions in this warm and funny way and very intimate way too. And you can tell this is why people love Cary Grant. It's just his way with words, his way with people. This means of he is a star, and yet he is so approachable. That comes through so well. And so many of the questions that were asked, he answers them. For instance, questions were asked about his work with, say, Howard Hawks and his work with Alfred Hitchcock. And so he talks about the differences and the similarities between the two artists from his perspective, again, based on his work with them. And he's asked too about comedic timing, and how to develop a comedic film character and what his take is. And he gives some very astute answers here. And some other questions too, again, the importance of comedic timing, how it just, it's almost like, and what he does too, he describes a type of process, but he's also very modest, and he just says it is part of the flow of the film, or the essence of the film. But in fact, through his comments, we are reminded just how much work it took, and how much thought and care and process it took, and planning it took. And that is the genius of a performer like Cary Grant, and what he had to do in order to make that part of the film work. And it works splendidly, And so there's scenes where he mentioned he had to take a fall, and that timing needed to be perfect. And it truly is. And also it's wonderful to hear him talk in front of an audience who obviously love the film, and they're talking about, there's so much laughter, and it's nonstop laughter, and they were just admiring the film in this warm, open atmosphere in which Cary Grant is taking questions. Wonderful. So please check it out if you can. Again, it's an audio excerpt, or an audio clip or recording. Great stuff. Approximately 35 minutes. That's not all, because then we get a 15-minute audio excerpt conversation from 1972. It's between Howard Hawks and Peter Bogdanovich. So once again, we get more words from Howard Hawks, which is always welcome, and we get the questions from Peter Bogdanovich, which is also always welcome. And the conversation is, of course, focusing in, or this excerpt is focusing in, I should say, on the work on Bringing Up Baby. And here we get some more great behind-the-scenes anecdote information from Howard Hawks, as inspired by the questions from Bogdanovich. It's great stuff. He's talking, for instance, about Hager Wilde, Dudley Nichols. I think at the time of the interview, Peter Bogdanovich didn't realize until the question was asked that Hager Wilde was indeed a woman. And so Peter Bogdanovich says, "Oh, I didn't know Hager Wilde was a woman." And then Howard Hawks said, "Oh yes, she was the one who started, who had the story, and then she worked with Dudley Nichols." So that is an interesting little detail that emerges in this and the fact that Peter Bogdanovich was learning as well as he was asking the questions. So that's really fascinating as well. And then also the topic of the film, and say Katharine Hepburn and her work with Walter Catlett as well. The secrets of the film, the use or the how to film the leopard. There's shots of the leopard and the dog. Sometimes they are optically placed together, but also there are scenes where they're actually in the same space physically. And so Howard Hawks is like, oh my goodness, so the insinuation is that it probably took a lot of effort on the part of everyone involved in order to get those shots exactly right. And also, speaking of effort, it's, I think, been reported on, or it's been mentioned about the production and how Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant were just laughing a lot, and it was a very funny atmosphere because of the material that they're working on, so they're having a really good time. But there's also an anecdote which is really funny in and of itself about how there was a particular moment where Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn had to start shooting a particular scene at 10 a.m. in the morning, I think, and then it went on to 4 p.m. that afternoon because they just couldn't stop laughing. And so I had heard these stories about the laughter and stuff, so this is great, but I didn't realize that, and it wasn't spelled out outright by Howard Hawks in this interview excerpt, but he insinuated or he hinted at the fact that the reason why Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn were laughing so much might have been due to some kind of maybe a sexual innuendo, double entendre that had to do with that particular scene or dialogue. I think it had to do with the intercostal clavicle as well as a prop. And so this is very funny in and of itself as an anecdote, because it also reminds us of one of the sources of the humor, which is the double entendre nature of a lot of the dialogue. So this is great. Absolutely great, as a reminder of the very fundamental layers and the various sources of humor, as well as the behind-the-scenes intrigue, or not intrigue, but behind-the-scenes anecdotes provided by Howard Hawks, as well as just the living, breathing sort of learning journey of Peter Bogdanovich and others, as captured. All this is captured in this excerpt. So this is great stuff. So please check this out as well if you can. Again, the excerpt is approximately 15 minutes. That is not all, because, well, that's all for the supplements, I should say, but that is not all as far as the Criterion presentation is concerned, because we have this cover, and it goes on to the back. I should say, too, that the spine and the way the title appears on the spine is also very clever. So if you do have this particular release, check out the spine as well. And we have the booklet. Now, I have taken the liberty of taking the booklet out prior to this video starting. And this is a robust, stapled booklet. It's very wonderful. Great stuff indeed. I should say, too, art is art director Sarah Habibi, designer F. Ron Miller. And it has this leopard motif, again from the cover and also inside, both black and white pictures and art renderings, and also color as well. So the leopard pattern is repeated here. And of course, this is a very fundamental aspect because of it's in the title itself, right? Baby. So bringing up baby. So this is really great. Now, the booklet itself is wonderful because it has a number of writings. First, it has the essay by Sheila O'Malley, and this is Bones, Balls, and Butterflies. And so this O'Malley essay is another great one. Perhaps best read after one has watched the film Bringing Up Baby, and when one reads it, I think, or when I read it, I realize it's so well packed, so well balanced, and it brings up all the points, and it serves as a further highlighting of some of the points that were mentioned in other parts of the supplements, but also brings up a number of fine details that are, again, great and essential matter in terms of an engagement and journey with regard to bringing up babies. So check it out if you can, or read it if you can. This is the O'Malley essay, Bones, Balls, and Butterflies. That is not all, because then there is, I mentioned Hager Wilde, and Hager Wilde came up, say, also in the conversation between Bogdanovich and Howard Hawks. But Bringing Up Baby was purported to be based upon a story that was by Hager Wilde. And so that story, which is described as being having been originally published in Collier's magazine in the April 10th, 1937 issue. Now that story, Bringing Up Baby, by Hager Wilde, is now reproduced and reprinted in the booklet. And so the reason why you have this robust, long, many-page booklet, which is nearly, or it's 40 pages, is because of the fact that it includes this short story, the Hager Wilde short story from 1937. I love it. It's great. Absolutely great. It is a 1937 story, and there's a particular detail that the Criterion collection notes in the description. But with that understanding, it is a story of its time, but it also is, of course, the basis of this film, Bringing Up Baby. And so we see the details, we see the ways in which, of course, the underlying writing has connections and also divergences with the ultimate, what ended up being an adaptation that came a little bit later. And so this interplay is very interesting, and also the writing itself is quite clever and quite well placed. And so to have this, and not just as a resource, but just as another form of the entertainment value, is itself valuable or wonderful. So well done to Criterion for including this as well. So this is the O'Malley essay, and then the story, the short story, the Hager Wilde short story. And then we have as well included into it certain shots and certain stills from the production, or from the film itself. So well done, Criterion, for doing this. So this is the presentation by Criterion of Bringing Up Baby. Again, it's spine number 1085. Another wonderful, great addition to the physical media catalog of Criterion. So please check it out if you can. This is the film Bringing Up Baby. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.